Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. I'm your host, Nancy Guitar. Well, my guest is a former university professor and an author of many books. Time to meet Rosemary Sullivan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nancy. Pleasure to be here.
So before we get to the books, you were a professor at the University of Toronto, correct?
Yes,
How long were you there?
I think I was there 35 years.
And
I started teaching when I did my PhD in England, so I was ready to start teaching when I was 25. I taught in France and then in Victoria, BC, and then came to Toronto.
Well, in France as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So what was your subject that you taught?
Literature, Canadian literature, and I actually established the creative writing program at the University of Toronto in 2006. So we've
Fantastic.
graduating students since then, and I'm sure we've produced at least 120 books.
Oh my
Wonderful students.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. How wonderful is that? Now, speaking of books, let's talk about yours. Now, I know one of your books is Where the World Was.
Yes.
When did you write that?
It was a kind of COVID exercise because I one of the things I missed most during COVID, apart from my husband who was stuck in Chile because all flights were canceled by Air Canada between Chile and Toronto.
Right.
The thing I missed most was travel. So I went back to collect all my travel pieces and then added a few to the book. And I was just looking at Alberto Mangel said literary journalism at its very best, he called the book, which is quite wonderful because he's a great writer.
Okay.
So I went to Goose Lane, not to HarperCollins, and they said this is a book about a woman writer's life. So they had me write a preface about how I started writing and so on.
Well, that's a good place for you to start. Where did you start writing and when?
Well, and my first book I published when I was 25. It was my PhD thesis, and I published it with the University of Washington Press, and it was called The Garden Master, the poetry of Theodore Ruthke. I loved Ruthke's poetry.
Could
And
you,
then
sorry.
after that, when I was a young academic, they work, and I worked very hard. You have three classes rather, sometimes as many as 75 students. You're correcting papers and so on. So for a while, I was doing mostly articles in magazines. Things like academic things like when is Margaret Atwood surfacing not James Dickey's Deliverance or something like that, right? It was fun. But then I published my first book of poetry called The Space a Name Makes, and was lucky enough to have it awarded the best first book of poetry in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah, great.
Good.
And so that made me believe I could be a writer. Well, I remember in university when I was in third year studying the Romantic poets, there was this young man who was saying, I'm going to be a writer. And I thought, oh, how can you say that? Writers are people we study. So to build your confidence as a writer takes a while.
Okay, right. And now I believe you have some copies of your books there that maybe you could show so people can
Oh,
see so that's
can
the
you
one
see
where the
that?
world was written during COVID, right?
Yeah. And that picture is me in Cuba.
Oh, right.
Beside the rental Jeep that we took to go all over the island.
Okay, great.
This one is Stalin's daughter,
Hmm.
almost made into a film.
Is that right?
Yeah, there was a filmmaker, producer called Kieran Donnelly, Irish. He really wanted to make it, but he said this would have been maybe 2 years ago. Nobody wanted to touch Stalin. Maybe, Putin was still, I guess, an enigma. But I
Right.
think that it's, anyway, this is a funny little book called The Guthrie Road.
Okay.
And it was an exercise, and the editor, or the publisher rather, Black Moss Press, wanted us to produce, a variety of writers, us to produce a book of 80 pages, which could be read in an hour.
Okay.
So this is the portrait of my my family, my grandparents. That's my grandmother, Lottie, and my grandfather, Jeremiah Guthrie, and their kids. There would be there's only 2, 4, 6 there. There were 4 more. 10 kids.
Yeah,
This is
I come from a family of 12, so.
yes, good. Yeah. Well, my mom had 5 of us, but her own family was actually 11, but they lost one.
Right.
This is the Betrayal of Anne Frank, which was kind of wonderful to do. Oh, this is the poems. Yeah.
The bone.
The Bone Ladder.
So tell me about that title, The Bone Ladder.
It's the idea that we climb down the bone ladder to become ourselves, and the bone ladder is our ancestors.
Oh,
Yeah.
I never heard that term.
I made it up.
That's why I never heard of it. But that's really interesting, yeah. So, when other than the book during COVID, like what inspires a writer to write?
It's so different for each person, but in my case, I'm writing nonfiction mostly. I did one book, I don't have it here actually, it's in the other room, called Labyrinth of Desire, subtitle Women, Passion, and Romantic Obsession. And I was trying to explain why we lose our heads in this love affair and what's going on. Really, it's all about ourselves.
Right.
It's projecting all that's best in ourselves onto the other. And there's a wonderful Australian writer, Christina Stead, who said, every love story is a ghost story. And I said, you have to exorcise the ghost or materialize the ghost, allow the ghost to be real. Anyway, that began with a short story that I made up. It wasn't autobiographical. But other than that, my books are mostly nonfiction, except for poetry. And with nonfiction, it's a very expensive undertaking, frankly. When I wrote about Stalin's daughter, for instance, I traveled to Moscow. I met Stalin's grandson, Sasha Berdonsky, who was not very fond of his grandfather. I met her friends. I visited the places she lived. I went to England to meet friends that she'd known there. I went to Georgia to see Stalin's roots. I went across the United States. I met the CIA officer who helped her escape from India. So, you have to have a really pretty good advance.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And so I did get, when I'm thinking of a nonfiction project, sometimes it's the editor who suggests, have you thought of this? But I will approach my publisher with a 20-page proposal and say, what do you think? And if they like the proposal, they'll go for it.
Okay.
So that's what it is to write nonfiction.
Right.
Fiction is an entirely different matter. I really, I find nonfiction personally more compelling almost than fiction, because some of it's, nonfiction is so outrageous. The things people do and live through and so on. Writing about Elizabeth Smart was like writing a novel, right?
Right.
And it's true. I mean, you make nothing up when you're writing nonfiction. That's your commitment to the reader. When I started my book, my biography of Elizabeth Smart, called By Heart, I said she was wearing a hat from Harrods and a coat from Peter Jones. I'd actually seen the receipts. So, and I like the idea that I'm not making anything up.
Right. Well, in the writing of the daughter of Stalin, how long did the process, like from the time you came up with the concept to getting the book published, like how long did that take?
Usually 3.5 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm thinking for that book, I'm not sure whether I got a Guggenheim, maybe I got a Killam. But the wonderful thing about the University of Toronto is they'd let you take a leave in those days, not anymore. I think young people will get a grant to do some research, but they won't have the time. But I would get the time off. So the first thing I do would be collect all the papers. It was quite amusing to me that, I'd collect with Villa Arbel, I'd collect the CIA papers on Victor Serge or something. And the postman would come to the door and say, here's your package, and it would say CIA on it, or FBI. That became very much a topic, I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, for the postman, I was like, whoa, wonder what's in here, right?
That's right.
That's
And then you do the interviews when you feel you know the subject well enough to be convincing.
right.
Then you set up. I mean, I must have interviewed at least 40 people for the Stalin daughter book.
But why her in particular?
Um, because my publisher phoned me, and she said, from New York, and she said, my editor, I should call her really, Claire, and she said, have you read the New York Times obituary? Stalin's daughter just died.
Oh,
And I said, yeah, it's a very interesting story, because what happened with Stalin's daughter is in 1967, she defected.
right. Okay.
67 was the Cold War.
Mm,
That was not something you did. And so she was living in India, and she felt she was being treated like state property.
right.
They tell her to do this and that, and she couldn't do this and she couldn't do that because she was Stalin's daughter.
Right.
So she took her Russian passport, which she shouldn't have had, but she was smart enough to get it off the ambassador, the Russian ambassador, to the American embassy. Walked in, and she said, "I think you're going to find this hard to believe, but I'm Stalin's daughter." And the consul said, "You're Stalin's daughter, the Stalin?"
Oh my goodness.
She was wonderful. She was a very, very interesting woman, and wrote an autobiography of growing up in her family. In many ways, it was a projection of, I would say, what's happening now. I mean, I just read that Putin, gave his the salon at the Venice Biennale to Bolivia. Russia didn't show its artists, gave it to Bolivia. Why? Because he's looking to get a contract exclusive for lithium. I mean, and how a authoritarian system works. I mean, Putin is nothing nearly as terrifying as Stalin, but Svetlana lost her favorite aunt and uncle who were killed by Stalin. She lost her two aunts who went into solitary confinement for 7 years in the Lubyanka jail. Her brother was killed by the Germans. It was an incredibly tragic life, and how you could be as strong as she was is quite amazing. And I got to know her daughter very well.
Right. Okay. Wow. So fascinating. Really is fascinating, isn't
It
it?
really is. Yeah, yeah. And the same with the Villa Arabelle book. I just came back from New York, believe it or not, because a young person is doing a documentary. And yeah, so I reread my book. I wrote it 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And it's amazing because I started in 1933, and nobody was taking Hitler seriously.
Mm,
That's what's amazing about it. The French called him Jolly Coco. The Germans said that Goering, the Minister of Propaganda, was Wotan's Mickey Mouse. I mean, and you watch slowly, accretively, the trap being set,
mm.
and people trying to resist it. So it was salutary to read it, that's for sure.
It sounds like similar to what's happening in the US a little bit.
Frankly, yeah, the splitting into two divisive camps. I mean, that's why I'm so glad we have a parliamentary system, but just to have two parties at each other's throats, and then slowly, the book that I think is shocking is Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale.
Okay.
40 years ago, she predicts the rise of the alt-right, the assault on women's bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and book burning. She predicts it. I do know her because I did a book about her,
Okay.
biography of until her child was born,
Right.
with her permission. But I said, that was prophetic. She said, no, I was just writing what I saw. I said, well, you saw more deeply than most of us,
Yes, definitely. Kind of
Yeah.
scary, isn't it? But, anyway, that's a different topic, totally what's happening over there. Writing nonfiction and then writing poetry. Like, what for you, what is the easier, or is it not, is it the same type of thing? Like, I don't mean, I'm not saying that properly. I'm not asking.
No, you are. I know exactly what you're asking.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The hardest is poetry.
Okay.
Yeah, because I say that a poem moves in vertical time. So a poem is usually a sudden illumination, right, of something, of a moment, of a landscape, of a thought, and you almost have to wait for them. I mean, I usually write. I'm not writing much poetry anymore, occasionally, but I used to have to write 3 or 4 to get the machine oiled up before something interesting would happen. Whereas, fiction is nonfiction rather, especially the kind of biography I write is vertical.
Right.
You go 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps, and you keep, and then you edit and so on. So I love the process of writing prose, and it's also, you want to make sure you have what I would call metaphoric energy when you're writing. You want to have real emotion,
Right.
but a biography has a beginning and an end, and then a preface.
Are you working on anything currently?
Believe it or not, I've just finished a book about cats.
Well, I believe it. Thinking like,
I
well,
had 2 darling cats,
okay.
and I lost one in 2000. He was 14, and I lost the second about a month ago. He was 17 and a half.
Right.
And they were called Negrito and Ensueño because my
Ah,
husband is Chilean Spanish. And so the book is called Fur Spirits, a writer, a musician, and 2 cats. And they came to us in the most extraordinary way, which is we got a phone call from a friend
mhm.
said that his friend's family house had burnt, had caught fire. And the mother cat who lived in the basement went into the fire 6 times to rescue each of her kittens. So she rescued all 6 of them,
Wow.
one at a time. And then she expired from smoke inhalation.
Oh my.
So would we take two kittens? And we did, and loved them for 17 years. But it's about, do cats dream? And the answer is yes. And I know I have biological evidence for it. There's a wonderful psychologist, anthropologist who explains that dreaming begins with mammals.
Right.
So all mammals, starting with mice, probably dream. They're rehearsing their things they must learn during the day, and how do cats communicate with each other, and
Yeah.
but also some very extraordinary and unusual experiences, because I think we have a much broader apprehension of reality than we know. I
Hmm.
mean, we live here, right?
Yeah.
So that because we want rational and
Yeah.
structure and order and so on, but then sometimes the trap doors open and we see, and I've had strange communications with the cats, and I'm not. Yeah, you do too.
Me too, definitely.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And when you tell people, it's like their eyes glaze over because they don't believe it.
No, I mean, I moved to a new house. And I bought this place in Chile because he wanted to set up a sound studio because he is a recording engineer and musician.
Okay.
And so I rented this very nice apartment, first floor, and it had this beautiful backyard, which was all stone and patio, plants and so on. So the first day I bring the cats in the carrier in the front door, and I open the back door and let them out, and they stay out. And then I went in the evening to call them, and the sueño was gone. So I think, okay, Negrito was too fat to get over the fence, but but sueño could. I go to the neighbors, and here's sueño. Next day, same thing, and sueño's gone hunting. I go over to the neighbors, and then the third night I say, oh, I'm not doing this anymore. And sueño, make your own way home. And you know what I'm talking about. I had, as I was asleep, a sudden vision of Ensueño, surrounded by light, looking at me. I got up and I went to the front door, opened the front door, and there he was.
Yeah.
I mean, if logically he should have been at the back door.
Right. Okay.
How did he know, A, where the front, he came in his carrier, but B, he was calling me, you know? So those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, only cat people will love the book. If I can find a publisher.
Oh my goodness, that is like, you know, I again, after when we finish this the interview, I'll share with my cat story. You know, it was not my daughter. It was my daughter's cat, not my cat. But she had a bad attitude, but I loved her anyway. There's something about them that is so fantastic. So by the way, do you have a website that, or can people
Yes.
Google you and find you that way?
Yep. RosemarySullivan.com.
Okay, nice and simple. People will be able to find you.
Yeah.
Want to check out your books,
Yeah.
right? Or get up to you. Maybe people more interviews. I don't know what you do.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's a way to contact me. I don't give out my personal
Yeah,
email to you, yes, but you can contact me through the webpage. And I will say that my husband, when we were doing when I was writing Villa Herbel, World War II escape in a house in Marseille, we managed to live in Cassis for 3 months. And while we were there, he did a film, a 15-minute film, which was a kind of promotional film for my book. And it's beautiful. So it's under film at the top, under the labels, film. It's this 15-minute portrait of what refugees had to go through and what the escape routes were in the Second World War. Yeah.
right. Wow. Well, we're going to end it there because we're going to run out of time anyway.
Yes.
So just stay on camera. So to the audience, you've been listening to Rosemary Sullivan. I'm going to share her website so you can find her and check out her books and whether it's the nonfiction. I got to read some of them for sure, and her poetry books. And thank you anyway, everybody, for watching the show. I hope you continue to do so. Take care and peace out.
Thank you.